So I would like to begin with a communication tip for those of you who are communicators. If you speak from your weakness, you will never run out of material. Yeah, I thought, some of you didn't get that. Yes, if you speak, I tell preachers that all the time. It's like, if you preach from your weakness, you'll never run out of material. They're like, oh yeah. So today we're beginning a brand new series, and I am going to speak from my weakness. And by what I mean by that is this is something that I wrestle with. In fact, I wrestle with it so much. Sandra and I had this conversation. I said, I'm not even sure that I should preach about this or talk about this because it's not like something I've just begun wrestling with. This is kind of a lifelong thing. And in my own personal Bible study, I keep bumping into these themes that just kind of take me back to square one as it relates to what we're going to talk about for the next few weeks. But then I thought, you know what? I'm always telling preachers, hey, if you speak from your weakness, you never run out of material. So we're just going to dive right in. So for the next few weeks in this series that I'll introduce more properly in just a moment, we're going to talk about a temptation that is common only among Christians. Only Christians wrestle with the way that we're going to talk about it. Now, if you're not a Christian, after today, you may be gladder than ever that you're not a Christian. In fact, this may be sort of an anti-evangelism message for you. You may step back and go, oh my goodness, if that's what it means to be a Christian, I need to give this some more thought. But while this isn't a temptation that you wrestle with the way that we wrestle with it, there is a tension that all of us wrestle with. And this particular temptation that's, common really only among Christians, it touches on a tension that everybody feels. This series may help you make sense out of the disappointment and the discontentment, that abiding sense of never enoughness and that longing, that sense of if onlyness that you feel at times, the longings that are internal that make you feel lonely at times, even though you're surrounded by people. But in terms of what Christians wrestle with, there's a particular way that this interfaces and comes together with our faith, even though those feelings are certainly common to everybody. So even if you're not a Christian, there's going to be some takeaway. But for the next few weeks, we're going to focus on this very, very specific temptation that really only Christians wrestle with. And the thing that's so odd about it, and the reason this first message in this series may seem a little kind of intangible, I'm going to try to make it practical at the end, is that I'm convinced that many of us don't even know this is a temptation. We don't even know, we oftentimes don't even have words to put around the struggle that we feel, even though those emotions that I just talked about are certainly a part of the human experience. And this temptation is not just unique to us in the 21st century. This temptation is actually one of the three temptations that Jesus faced that Matthew and Luke tell us about when Jesus went to be tempted alone in the wilderness. And if you'll remember, if you grew up in church, Jesus, was led up by God, sent him out into the desert to be tempted. And then the devil came along and there were these personal temptations according to the devil, which, that's a little bit strange for some of us. But Matthew and Luke tell us this is what happened. And the third temptation is where we're going to begin. And here's how it unfolds. Matthew and Luke both tell us that the devil took Jesus up to a high place and he showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. Matthew says, and their splendor. Now maybe Jesus was on a mountain looking down at Jerusalem at night and the entire city is lit up. It's the city of God. And maybe this represented all the kingdoms of this world, or maybe there was more to it. We don't know. And in this moment, the temptation was this: Jesus, look at it. Look at him. Look at all of that. Take it in. I was trying to think of something that we could compare this to, and every illustration falls way short. But, for some of us, you walk into a car showroom, at a dealership, and it's like, kind of takes your breath away, and it's perfect, and the lights are perfect, and you're just overwhelmed with this desire. It's like, if only. Or maybe it's a boat show. I made the mistake of taking my son Garrett to the Atlanta boat show one year. That was a terrible idea. There was just too many shiny objects. Like you just wanted all of it. It was overwhelming. We were driving home, and we both agreed we should never do that again. It's just, or a home show. You ever a tour of homes? One of those things. It's really just the tour of discontentment, right? It's like the kitchens and the washer and the dryer, and they have an app, and you can wash your clothes clothes from a different country, and it just goes on, and the windows move, and the shades move, and it's just amazing, and everything's digital. And that was just the first home. Then you go to the second home, and the walls move, and it's just, and then you get home. Isn't it true if you've ever been to home? You get home, and you're like, I think somebody lowered our ceilings while we were gone. It's like, because it's just, but the point is, there are environments, and maybe I didn't touch on one of yours, you walk in and it's just, you know. So this is that moment for Jesus. Feast your eyes on the kingdoms of this world. The tempter is saying, Jesus, I know why you're here. You're here for this. You're here for them. In all of this, I will give you, I mean, here are the words, I will give you all their authority. In other words, you could be the King of Kings, and their splendor, all the shiny parts, all the glorious parts, all the parts that just reek of wealth and opulence. It has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want to. Now, if that's the only part of the story there was, and if that's the only part of the story we knew, we would say, and rightly so, let's just be honest. I know, you don't want to pretend, you want to pretend like there's none of this in you, but it's in you. Who would say no to that, right? I mean, who doesn't want to be the king? Who doesn't want to be queen? Who doesn't want to have so much wealth that you could do whatever you want, right? And who doesn't want more power or more influence? And not because we're evil. Think of all the good you could do in the world if you had that much power and that much wealth and that much influence. And before you start feigning humility, like, no, I don't really want to be the queen. Maybe princess. I don't want to be the queen. It's like, whoa. Let's come on, right? Do you turn down promotions at work? No. Do you turn down raises? No. Do you turn down bonuses? No. Do you avoid good opportunities, pursuing good opportunities? Of course you don't. None of us do, and we shouldn't. So if this is all there is, this doesn't really strike us as a temptation. It really feels more like the opportunity of a lifetime. I mean, it's kind of the goal, isn't it? Isn't it what we get up early for and work hard for and go to school and finish school and go to graduate school and study for and dress up for and interview for and discipline ourselves for? Not because we're evil, but because we're progress people. We're achievement people. We're creative people. We're wired for movement and advancement and progress and success. So this doesn't even feel like a temptation. It's like, I'm gonna give you all this. Wow, thanks for the raise, thanks for the bonus, thanks for the opportunity. I'll take it. That doesn't feel like a temptation. It just seems like opportunity. But there was a trade-off. Most of us know how this rolls out, right? Even if you didn't grow up in church, you've heard bits and pieces of this story. There was a trade-off. And the trade-off is what made this a temptation for Jesus. And as we're gonna see in the next few weeks, the trade-off is what makes this a temptation for Christians, for Jesus followers. All this, the tempter says, all this I will give you, he said. All you have to do is just bow down and acknowledge me as your king. Not just for a moment, just one moment. Now, if you're not a Jesus follower or not a Christian or not a theist for sure, this is where we kind of part ways, because let me just say what you're thinking. I get it. It's like, see, there's no devil, Andy. I mean, I can't find that. You lost me when you opened, except for that communication tip. That was kind of funny. But beyond that, you lost me because there's no devil. There's just what we see is what we get. There's just what you see. There's just the material world. And if there's an opportunity to achieve and win and excel and gain influence and gain wealth, Andy, it's just that. It's an opportunity. It's not a temptation. Okay, we're not, think about it just humanly speaking, we're not tempted to achieve. We're not tempted to succeed. We're not tempted to thrive, right? We're supposed to. And if it's not what you do, people wonder what's the matter with you, right? Get off the couch, take off the headset, do something with your life. Go back and finish school, discipline yourself, get a job, move forward, get married. I mean, that's just what you're supposed to do. If you're not doing that, then you have a problem. So no, we're not tempted to succeed. We're tempted to be lazy. We're not tempted to achieve. We're tempted not to explore and exploit our strengths and our potential. So this doesn't feel like a temptation. It just feels like a missed opportunity. Now back to the story of Jesus, you know what happens next. He says, no, thank you. Actually, he said this. Jesus said to him, away from me. I don't want what you're offering. I don't want what you're offering. You're offering the opportunity to rule like every other ruler. You're offering me the opportunity to be a king like every other king. You're offering me kingdoms like every other kingdom. That's not why I came. It's not why I'm here. This is so important. You can't give me what I came for, because what I came for is something the world has never seen before. So away from me. And then he says this, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. I'm not here to acquire, to improve, or to recreate more of what already exists. Not my kind of kingdoms. Not my kind of kingdom where might makes right. The people with the gold make the rules. Image management, win, lose, top down, all for one, and I'm number one. That's not what I've come for. I've not come for more of that, which is honestly, again, it's confusing for many of us. Whether you're a Christian or not, it's confusing because, well, what's the alternative? If it's not achieve, and if it's not more of, and it's not gain, and it's not increase your circle of influence, what's the alternative? And this is why the temptation is so subtle. What's the alternative? Don't compete, don't care, don't compete, don't accomplish, get degrees, just get by, just roll over and allow the world to roll over you. And if all we see is all there is, if what we see in this world is all there is to this world, it's a win-lose world. It is a win-lose world. And there's no perceived value in losing. In other words, if the value system that you're confronted with every day at work, if the value system you're confronted every day with at school, if the value system that we're confronted with every single day, everywhere we go, with everybody we meet is our only option, then we're only left with one good option, right? Strive to thrive and strive to survive. And I relate to this because I'm a striver. I want to be successful. I want to expand my influence, in a proper way. And I don't mean illegally or in some unethical way. It's just in me. Many of you are strivers as well. In fact, the reason some of you are strivers because you're just wired to be strivers, just more and more, and not more for yourself, but just moving forward, progress, accomplishment. You're wired that way. Some of you weren't so much wired that way, but your daddy wasn't enough that way, and you decided, you know what? My family is not gonna repeat that history. I'm gonna do better for my family than maybe your father, your mother, your parents did for you. So it's in all of us. But according to Jesus, and this is why we're gonna talk about it for 4 weeks, according to Jesus, there is another way. It's not either or. It's not take your foot off the gas and coast and hope you end up somewhere safe, or keep your foot on the accelerator and drive yourself crazy and the people around you crazy. And it's not trying to find balance between those two. There is a completely other way of living, and Jesus modeled it. And it's a way that I am tempted to ignore and abandon every single day. Because not only does this new way, the way of Jesus, flow against the culture that I'm in, like the culture you're in, but it actually flows against the culture and I guess you could say, the culture and the direction of my me first, I got here first heart. It flows against my all about me nature. And yet I know, because I've seen it, I've experienced it. That's why it's so crazy that I would give into the temptation to abandon it. The way of Jesus is better. It is better for you and it is better for the yous around you. It's why we say and believe with all our heart that following Jesus really will make your life better, and following Jesus will make you better at life. A better husband, a better wife, a better mother, a better friend, a better employee, a better employer. It really is better. But every single day of my life, and if you're a Jesus follower, every single day of your life, you are being tempted and you will be tempted to abandon this way. And just to, if you get nervous about this, the way of Jesus will not make you less productive. That's the fear. This isn't just coast. It's not gonna make you less productive. It's going to make you better productive. It's not gonna make you less ambitious. It's gonna make you appropriately ambitious, because God put his ambition in you, and God put his sense of progress in you. God is the ultimate creator, and you're made in his image, so of course it is in you to create and to take things from chaos to order and from disorganization to organization. It's why we thrive in certain kinds of environments, and then we come into some environments and we change the environment so we can thrive and other people can thrive. All of that is an expression of the image of God. But when we take all of that and get it confused with the win and the lose orientation of our culture, we begin to give in to the temptation that Jesus faced in his third temptation that is in conflict with the way of Jesus. It won't make you less successful. It will redefine success for you. So what we're gonna do in this series is we're gonna unpack it. And then we're gonna learn to identify when we're being tempted to walk away from it. Now, to kind of get us started in terms of text, Jesus' response to this third temptation is actually very instructive in terms of where we're gonna go. So here again is what Jesus said in response to the temptation. Worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Jesus was actually quoting something from the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy, Moses had led the nation of Israel through the wilderness for about 40 years. They're about to enter God's new home for them. We call it the promised land. And so Moses is giving them a pep talk to say, hey, when you get in there, when you begin to thrive, when you begin to be successful, when you begin to build your own homes, when you begin to flourish, don't forget. Here's the full text. Here's what he says in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Be careful that you don't forget the Lord, your God, who is the one who brought you up out of Egypt. You did not do this on your own. Don't forget the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Fear the Lord your God. Here's the statement that Jesus quoted. Fear the Lord your God and serve him only. Don't forget whose you are and what God has done for you. In other words, let that center you with all of your ambition and all of your progress orientation and all of your expand my influence and all of your drive, whether it's strong or weak, whether it's corporate or home, wherever it is. Don't forget to allow that to be the center. Now, the other thing that makes this so interesting, if I can tell you, kind of dip back in Old Testament history real quick, is this is years after God had demonstrated his amazing power in Egypt to Pharaoh, where basically God out-Pharaoh'd Pharaoh. He humiliated all of his false and pagan gods. Then God destroyed his entire army. That there's a sense in which all of that Old Testament narrative, even what follows after Deuteronomy, it's as if God is playing by the rules of the kingdoms of this world to set the stage for a kingdom nothing like this world, nothing like the world had ever seen, and it was inaugurated with the birth of King Jesus. But in his final temptation, Jesus is tempted to abandon the new way, to embrace the old way, to go back to the ways of Pharaoh, to go back to the ways of win-lose, to go back to the ways of there are evil people and good people, and the evil people must be destroyed. In his final temptation, he's tempted and invited and expected, basically, to repeat history, to embrace that old way, the expected way, the win-lose way. But he had come, and this is the thing I want us to get as a group of churches. If only the Christian community could grasp this, and it's not original with me, it is in plain sight throughout the New Testament. He came to establish a brand new way of living, an upside down way, the way the Apostle Paul refers to as the way of the cross. So he refused the offer. But the problem with this way, this new way, is that it was unprecedented. It was untested. It was risky. In fact, at the end, we talk about this all the time, at the end, even his closest followers who had seen him live this new way out over and over and over and over with the wealthy and the poor and the advantaged and the disadvantaged, they'd seen him live this out. And yet they're at the very end. They're at the very end. They too are tested in a similar way that Jesus had been tested. And they fail the test. They opt out at the end. They were hoping when Jesus was arrested, there would be a Red Sea moment where God comes down out of heaven and destroys his enemies and destroys the enemies of Jesus and destroys the enemy of this new ecclesia, this new movement that had begun in Galilee and now had moved to Judea. It was all they knew. And when Jesus was arrested, again, they were being tested. They were being tempted just as Jesus was. And they viewed Jesus' arrest through the lens, well, the lens we look at everything through. They viewed Jesus' arrest through the lens of win-lose. And Jesus was clearly losing. And so they left him because they didn't want to be losers. And then 3 days later, they're back. 3 days later, they realized, wait a minute, he was not kidding. He really is a different kind of king who has come to establish a different kind of kingdom with a different kind of value system that impacts and touches on every aspect of our lives. So the icon, this is so amazing. Again, we're so accustomed to it. This is a thing that kind of grabbed my attention as I was studying through 1 Corinthians and, my personal Bible study. It's so amazing that the icon, the symbol for the ecclesia of Jesus is not a sword. It's not a checkered flag. It's not a trophy. It's not an army eating sea. It's a cross. And the thing, again, that's impossible for us to get our emotions and mind around is that in the first century, for first century Christians, the cross did not represent salvation or a salvation decision. It actually represented a completely different way of living, a different way of life. And the man who understood this the best, was the Apostle Paul. And the reason he understood it the best is, and we've said this before, he lived on both sides of this equation. He was an expert in, and he was a leader in the old ways. He was an expert in and actually fully sold out to and fully devoted to the old ways. The religious system that was all about win-lose. The religious system where you had to have an enemy to win and there was always an enemy. Where progress justified violence. Where actually the ends justified any kind of means. Where again, there were good people and there were bad people. We're the good people and the bad people must be eliminated. He knew all about that mindset, both through the filter of politics and religion. And he knew where that approach led because he was the leader. Again, if you've read the book of Acts, you know that when Christianity first began, it was called the Way, and it was considered a parasite. It was a parasite that was kind of globbing on to first century Judaism, and it was a contagion, it was a disease, and it needed to be eliminated. These people needed to be eliminated, and the Apostle Paul volunteered to eliminate them. And operating under the old way, the kingdoms of this world's way, the only way anybody knew to operate, he was free to do extraordinary things. He was free to track down, arrest, and execute apostate Jews. And his unbridled cruelty, when you read it for yourself in the book of Acts, his unbridled cruelty was considered God's will. This was God's way. Because after all, this was God's work. It was God's way because, well, what other way was there? I mean, when we read about modern or ancient, atrocities carried out in the name of Jesus, we read those stories and think, how could they do such a thing? The Apostle Paul would raise his hand and say, I can tell you exactly how you do such a thing because I weaponized and I politicized my religion with a clear conscience. But, and this will be hard for some of us. This is hard for me at times. It's easy to stand up here and say this. But here's the thing, if it ever got from our head to our heart, I think it would change us. I think it would change Christianity in our nation. I think it would change maybe the church, parts of the church, in the world. And here's what is undeniable. When Paul became a Jesus follower, he could find nothing in the teaching of Jesus to justify violent opposition to those who violently opposed him. He completely let go of the kingdom of this world ways. At times, what appeared to be the only way, the way that people would say that works, in fact, the only thing that works. Paul took up the way of the cross. And here's how he explained it to a group of people very much like us. I'm just gonna read you one verse from 1 Corinthians. There's so much more there. A group of people very much like us, very competitive, very much into who's who and what's what and how do you get the what's what and become the who's who. That was the culture of Corinth. Very progress oriented, educated, competitive, class conscious. Here's what he said. He said, you need to understand, because they were so unimpressed with Paul as a person and so unimpressed with his rhetoric, you know. There was a right way to speak and a wrong way to speak, a right way to do public presentations and a wrong way. And Paul shows up and just ignores all of that. And here's what he said. He said, the king, your text says Christ, but it's the king. The king sent me to preach the good news. That's good news for everybody. But not with wisdom or eloquence. These were like code words in Greek in that culture. Wisdom and eloquence. There's a way to do this. There's a way not to do it. Paul said, look, I'm ignoring all the normal stuff. I'm ignoring the pattern of the day because this is too important for that. I don't want my presentation to get in the way of what I'm presenting. But I'm not talking with wisdom and eloquence. Again, these words to those Greek thinking, Roman thinking men and women just made no sense. Because if I do, I'm concerned that the cross of the king, wait, your king had a cross? Wait, kings don't have crosses, kings have swords. I know, it's so different. Wait, the cross of your king? Yeah, he says, I don't want you to miss the message. Lest the cross of Christ, my king, be emptied of its power. And here's what they thought. Wait a minute. Somebody who has a cross doesn't have any power. If you have a cross or you're associated with the cross, you have abandoned and given up power. The cross means powerlessness. It's the bottom of the pile. It's oblivion. It's all things to be avoided. It represents the power of Rome, not the power of God. And for them, this glaring contradiction, and I hope somehow I can create the glaring contradiction, even speaking of this in our modern culture, this glaring contradiction, a king and a cross that has power that is available that you don't want to miss. All of that glaring contradiction points to the otherness, the upside downness of the values in the kingdom that Jesus came to unleash in the world. The way of Jesus, which is the way that we are tempted daily to avoid and abandon. It's so unnatural. You rarely see it. When you see it, you recognize it and you stop and you stare because it is so unusual, it is so rare, it's rarely modeled. In fact, in most cases, we're not even aware we're being tempted to abandon it. Worse than that, and I won't spend much time on this, worse than that, currently in our country, there are streams of Christianity that unapologetically resist the way of the cross because they view it as weak. They view it as passive. It's the statement I hear over and over and read over and over, perhaps you do too, is, hey, I hear what you're saying, but it won't work. That won't work, that won't work, that won't work. But it did. It's why we're here. It's why the cross is the global icon for your faith and mine. It's why the cross, in the first century, when it literally represented suffering and shame, the cross quickly became the icon for your faith. It would no longer represent empire. And it wouldn't represent crucifixion. It would represent a single crucifixion by which Jesus introduced a brand new way of life to the world. The way of Jesus, not simply a way of believing, a way of living that's so unintuitive. It always feels risky. And I'll be honest, the critics aren't completely wrong. It won't work the way we often define work. It won't change things as quickly as the way people want things quickly changed. It won't accomplish oftentimes what we think needs to be accomplished. But this was the very criticism Jesus received. This was the very reason at the very end of his ministry. I mean, you know the story. You know the story. Judas finally just throws up his hands and goes, this isn't working. This isn't getting us anywhere. You're too nice. You're too kind. You talk about death and dying and flogging. And I realize I have hitched my wagon to the loser wagon, and I'm going to get what I can from it, and I'm out of here because this won't work. But it did. It's why you're a Christian. It's why the message of Jesus survived the first and second and third centuries. But it is so risky and it is so different. We're always tempted to abandon it. Maybe it's why Jesus said this. And again, these words made no sense. They just didn't have any context for this when Jesus said it. Whoever wants to be my disciple. In other words, not just believe. You guys are following me around believing, I'm somebody special. But if you're going to follow me, anyone who wants to be my follower must deny themselves. That is, give up their independence and take up their cross daily. Follow me. When he said this, remember, when he said this, he hadn't died on the cross. When he said this had nothing to do with personal salvation from sin. This had everything to do with a different way of living. And when he said this, they're saying, wait a minute, the cross means oblivion. The cross means death. The cross is backwards. It's the wrong direction. In other words, wait, to follow you means we are moving in a completely different, wait. Now, Jesus, maybe you don't understand what a rabbi is. See, a rabbi takes the Torah and explains it better. A rabbi takes what has always been taught and contextualizes it for our modern world in the first century. And what you're suggesting is that we're going to abandon pretty much everything we know and move in a completely different direction, to which Jesus would say yes, because the King has arrived. And you have the privilege, especially those first century believers, you have the privilege of being the first group to follow the King. So as we wrap this first one up, it's kind of like, what are you even talking about? It sounds great, it sounds terrible, actually. I'm just confused. I want to give you an assignment this week, okay? This is just to get us started. And whether you're a Christian or not, in fact, even if you don't believe any of this, you should at least try this, okay? It's an opportunity to begin thinking in a different direction that may perhaps lead you to begin to live in a different direction. So I'm going to give you a question that I want you to take into your week, but hear me clearly. I do not want you to act on what comes to mind. It's too risky. It's too early. You get yourself in trouble. No, you're smart. You can figure this out. But I'm not asking you to do anything today. I just want you to consider something today. And I want to be super clear about this. When I give you this question, don't start thinking about U.S.-Russian, relations and China and the global economy. What about World War II? No, this is for you. And don't hear me asking you to do something that puts you in harm's way or to go back to something you should have never been a part of or something that's harmful or a relationship that's toxic. This isn't any of that. So don't go there. And I say all that to say, don't excuse the punch of this question by teasing it out to something that's so unreasonable that you get a pass. So this week, whenever there's conflict, at home or at school or at work, with a neighbor, major conflict, minor conflict, I just want you to ask yourself, don't act on it, okay? If you act on it, the results are on you, because I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm just asking you to consider something. In the midst of any conflict this week with whoever you find yourself, even small things, a little tension, I want you to ask yourself this question. What would choosing to lose look like in this situation? What would choosing to allow the other person to win look like in this situation? What would choosing to allow them to do it their way or have their way? What would choosing to allow them to take credit, even though it's not really all their credit? What would choosing to allow them to go first, even though I got here first, look like? What would choosing to defer look like in this situation? There is a big difference between losing and choosing to lose. Choosing to lose does not make you a loser, but choosing to lose may make you more like your Savior. And it's not weakness. You already know this, even as you imagine these situations. It's not weakness. It will require strength. It will require unnatural strength. It may require supernatural strength. You might even pray, God, help me let them win. Help me let them go first. And when you do that, you are close to the kingdom of heaven. I want to put a different word in there. It's not weakness, it's strength. I'm going to use Paul's word. This is Jesus' word. We're going to talk a lot about this next time. Don't miss next time. In that moment, you know what you need? You need power. You need the power that's associated with the cross. And in that moment, you may be closer to your Savior and more in sync with your Savior than you've ever been before. What would choosing? It's up to you. You choose. Nobody's making you do any of this. In fact, don't even do it. Just think about it. What would choosing to lose look like in this situation? And a good place to start is the parking lot on your way out this afternoon. We're going to wrap it up there. Don't miss part 2 of Icon, the empowering invitation of the cross. I'd love to pray for us. Heavenly Father, this is so heavy and it's so exciting. So would you please help me know how to talk about this in ways that are practical and understandable? Would you please help me walk in this afternoon, at home, in meetings, in the neighborhood, when I'm upset, when I'm not getting my way, when things aren't going fast enough, when people aren't cooperating, when people say it's my fault, I just know it's not my fault. Father, give us this sensitivity, tune us in to when we are being tempted, to abandon the way of the cross, the way of Jesus. So as we take this question into our homes and into our businesses and into our worlds, give us wisdom to know how to think it through. And Father, would you give each of